No spies on here. Okay, so welcome. We're Champagne Sparkling Cremant Masterclass.
I've got this on. Do we click continue?
Yes, you can click continue. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So we are going to talk a little bit about champagne, so Cremant sparklings, all pretty much the same, one and the same, through the prism of our wines to an extent, and also we're going to delve into the historical, the cultural aspects of champagne, and sort of try and tie it all back together again into, I guess, some semblance of a decent story. I think I would hope that from this you'll sort of walk away either feeling a little bit more comfortable around some of the additional components of champagne and a little bit of its history, or maybe at least some enjoyment of our wines while you're doing it. Now, there are 3 bottles of wine. You are welcome to drink all 3. You are welcome to drink 1. You're welcome to drink none. There is no judgment in this Zoom call if you start falling sideways. But I will talk sporadically about them through the presentation. So you can, I can share the notes that I'm going to do with you afterwards as well, so you can go back and revisit them. You should have some tasting notes with you there as well, and you can then, I guess, drink at your leisure and at your own pace. So I'll leave that with you, or you're more than welcome to buy more and drink more. So hopefully that is the case. So thanks to Zoom, one of the great things about it is that we've got this new medium where normally you come to a wine dinner. I don't do cellar door. I'm responsible within our family business for the wine production side in particular, and that means that I end up spending most of my time talking when I'm out doing sales to sommeliers, restaurant managers, like Ishan here, and our exporters and the like. So my conversation topics can be a little bit more in depth. And when I do wine dinners, you're only relying on, my speech and listening to me and watching me, I guess, to an extent. Whereas there's a lot of information I tend to try and impart. I try not to get too complicated in the winemaking process, but I'm trying, I guess, to stitch it together into some coherent story. And with this, I actually am able to use PowerPoint on Zoom that I can't use in a wine dinner. So I will start doing this. For those of you who are sick of PowerPoint, I am sorry, but we are talking about alcohol, so I hope some things are forgiven. So I will share this and we can start. Right. Okay, so we can all see that. So this is, I think, version 3.0. Each time I'm hoping it's getting better, not worse. So kicking in very quickly. So if you've got a sparkling there to enjoy, and if I was to recommend a sparkling without food or at the start or whenever, it classically would be a Blanc de Blanc. And there's a very good reason for that. Obviously, Blanc de Blanc is classified mainly as the aperitif style of sparkling. It's the wine insider's champagne. It is based upon a pure Chardonnay sparkling style. So I'm going to introduce this one and then I'll talk about, and you'll break all of this down a little bit as we go, but I've had presentations where I get to the end and I start talking about the wine and people go, oh, I can drink now. So backstory to it is the name it's obviously Blanchefleur means white flower, and it derives actually from an ancient French story. It was written in the 11th century in the court of Marie of Champagne. It was called the La Comte de Graal. I think you now know it as more the quest for the Holy Grail. And Blanchefleur is one of the key characters within that story. She just happens to also be a de Beaurepaire, which is where our name comes from. The name itself means of a beautiful hideaway or a good hideaway. It's a good sort of fitting name to go along with it. For us, it was a great connectivity between the two.
It's okay.
The very, very quickly, the background to this wine was we were producing we produced beautiful Chardonnays, normal classic table wine Chardonnays or still wine Chardonnays. And it's very obvious we get a very high acidity level, almost rivaling on that sort of very fine edge Chablis acidity. And acid is really important in the sparkling production. And as we were selling our table wines around the various restaurants, there was a lot of feedback that French champagnes were getting increasingly expensive and becoming unobtainable for a lot of restaurants, to the point where, I think the wholesale price of Moet and Chandon, which is very much an entry-level champagne, is $40 to $50 a bottle. And so there's been a pushback to some extent. You're starting to see some Australian champagnes, or sparklings, apologies, coming through with the House of Arras and Craiglinger in Tasmania, but in New South Wales, Centennial, Swift, which is beautiful, and us, hopefully, and a bunch of others. And they're really starting to fill that void where if you've got the cool climate Chardonnay, the high level of acidity, then there's the potential that you can also produce a decent sparkling from it. So we expanded our production into this initially by a method called Cremant, which I'll come back to. It's a shortcut. And we used to use it for our own little functions. And we upgraded this in 2016 to method traditionnel, which is effectively champagne method. And I'll explain what that means. So it's an expensive style to make. It's not cheap, but you do get the big difference between Cremant method and method traditionnel is the biscuits and brioche that come from its time on lees. And I won't jump ahead. I'll come back to what that means. It's been now making four vintages, so up to the fifth this year. It's been doing well for us. I think it's now almost our equal best-selling wine, and it's one of those great mentalities. We started off with a vision of Burgundy in mind. We have expanded our winery to include obviously sparkling champagne styles, Bordeaux styles, and Rhone Valley styles, all from a single vineyard, but won't preempt the horse cart here. The bit of the background to champagne, I always love using this as the benchmark. So there's been wine produced in Champagne for a very long time. It's not as long as Bordeaux, interestingly, but nearly as long. So back to the late Roman era. It's the closest province to Paris. And back in those days, there wasn't a large logistics chain. There weren't trucks and trains and barges. There was just horse and cart and probably people literally pushing barrels along the road. So proximity had a lot to play. So it developed quite quickly. And the varieties that they planted are the same as Burgundy, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. And it made table wine, still wine. There were every now and then some sparklings produced, but by accident. So the way that you produce sparkling is it's an introduction of sugar, and you start the fermentation off again in an anaerobic or an oxygen-less environment, which creates carbon dioxide, which makes the wine bubbly. Now, in the times back in the past when you would ferment, you'd ferment the sugar, the initial sugar in the grapes, and you'd ferment it into alcohol, that primary fermentation. Sometimes the fermentation wouldn't finish, and you get what's left, you get sugar which is left, which is called residual sugar. There's unintentional sugar retained, and it really relates to the fact that they didn't really understand the chemistry relationships. We're talking 1,500, 1,300 years before Lavoisier and his understanding of chemistry. And so it was an accident, and they didn't want it. And the reason why they didn't want it was because it used to shatter the bottles. I don't know if anyone here has ever made homebrew beer or the like. I know it's one of the first things I got as an 18-year-old was a beer brewing kit, and straight away worked out, knowing a bit of our background, more sugar equals more alcohol. I dosed up the sugar and tried to make these 11% beers, and we couldn't go under the house for about 6 months because it was literally, a minefield of bottles exploding at a fairly decent clip. This was the same thing back in Champagne. So they avoided it. They didn't want anything to do with it. And a lot of the wine back in those days would obviously transit across to the UK. And the UK, interestingly enough, they used to make their glass a little bit differently to the French. So the French had very substantial oak forests, and they still do these days. That's why we get a lot of our French oak from them. They'd use those to fire up their kilns and their smelters, which they would produce their glass from. Whereas the English were all about their navy, and they really reserved their oak forests for building ships. So they banned the use of oak in the kilns and the smelters, and they went and used coal. Now, we all know coal made, obviously, the ability to make coking coal and better grade steel, but it also produced better grade glass. And what happened coincidentally around this time was that these barrels of wine would turn up in London. And you can see it over here. They'd be pretty off. There wasn't a great, they'd be oxidized. They'd have problems with them. It wasn't a hygienic closure like we have these days. And so what they'd do is they would throw some molasses into them, almost like the Romans used to spice their wines to make them enjoyable. And that molasses would start the fermentation off quite often. And with the glass being better quality than the French glass, the bottles were actually able to handle it. And they discovered this sparkling wine, and they used to call it fizz, and that was around 1662. So this is before the French worked it out, and you can sort of see it here written up. And they started making a bit of a killing about it. People were quite excited. It actually got shipped back to the French court, and word started to spread. Now, the French back then, French used their scientific approach and sort of worked out that it had to do with the glass quality difference, and it was then really by the Dom Perignon himself, who perfected effectively the ability to use better quality glass with better quality fruit. And so going from this fun fizz that was in London, they started producing high grade wines that were sparkling. And obviously he was in Champagne. Champagne is a region, and that was where we got Champagne from. So really interesting when you understand a little bit of the background, how it sort of works itself out. But even still, in 1850, 66, 2/3 of the wine in Champagne was still just plain red wine. It's only really been the last 50 years that it's almost gone to 100% on a supply-demand basis. So a little bit of a background. Good way to start with the Blanc de Blanc. It is the aperitif style, and we'll start kicking into a little bit more of the detail around it. So we talked there about Blanc de Blanc and Blanc de Noir. So Champagne planted these varieties, it made table wines out of them. The real difference here is Blanc de Blanc is purely a Chardonnay style, and Blanc de Noir is a white of red. So what you do is you effectively press the wines off skins, so you don't have any skin contact with the juice, and you produce these clear champagnes from red varieties, which is Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. You can see this also in table wines with rosés, where you've had a little bit of time on the skin, a little bit of color, but effectively that's red wine without skin. So the same here. Normally you get that really lovely pink salmon color in the Blanc de Noirs, whereas Blanc de Blanc should be a very clean, very clear style of sparkling, especially when they're quite young. Interestingly, the Blanc de Blancs are called the wine inside of Champagne, and there's a reason for that. They're more aspirational in effect. So if you were to go to an expensive party and you were to turn up with the right wine for that party, it would be recommended to be a Blanc de Blanc. And knowing this, the pricing's obviously gone up and up. So most Blanc de Blancs are also happen to be the most expensive of the Chardonnays. Your Cristals, your Cru Clos de Mesnils, your Ruinart's probably your entry level, and some of the growers. But it is beautiful for its simplicity, and also because it has a very fine bead. So when you create bubbles or the fizz or whatever you want to call it with Blanc de Blanc, you get a very small bubble. It's called a very fine bead, whereas with Blanc de Noir or a blend between the two, the bubbles are a lot bigger and voluminous. So how do you make wine in France? So when you go back, we talked a little bit about how they discovered the actual process of sparkling in France. There's a lot more to it behind that. And it all stems from this term terroir. Now, in Australia, we have a fairly, not one-dimensional, but it's classic, quite a classical one-dimensional view on sparkling. And it relates to temperature. And you hear it a lot about, we're from Tasmania, we're the best state in Australia because we're cold, much better than the northern states. or even some of their mountainous areas in Victoria, much better than New South Wales. It's fairly nonsensical, to be honest. It's important from a variety selection. If you want to produce varieties like champagne or wines like champagne, you want to use varieties they use in champagne, and you want to probably try and grow them in an environment like champagne. But if you want to produce a wine from Spain, or like a Tempranillo or Grenache, or even a Shiraz, which is Spanish, or if you want to go Portugal, which is becoming very trendy with Touriga Nacional, or southern Italian like Nero d'Avolo, you want warmer climate. The reason is because those varieties in a cool climate don't ripen, they are underripe, and they become very bitter and very unenjoyable. The varieties have evolved through some level of controlled genetic modification in the vineyard, and just trial and error over a long period of time, and these to suit these conditions. But saying that, Hunter Valley produces beautiful Semillon, yet Semillon comes from Bordeaux, which is a cool climate area. So there's still a lot to be learned from the process. Either way, temperature is not the real definer of a wine's quality. The French talk a little bit more expansively about terroir, and they view it as a number of factors. This doesn't actually capture them all, but it's probably good enough summation. So climate is temperature, but it's also location or type of climate. It can also be topography. So which side of the slope you're on, are you on a river bend? Are there folds? Is there a fence above you? You hear that a lot in Burgundy, where below a fence, and that's stopped us. It's cool, pools the air, and we get a better quality, that level of detail. Flora and fauna is really important, interestingly. So your mid-row crops, the environment around, that can actually cross-pollinate into your vineyard. The grape varieties, there's cultural aspects too, techniques that have been used for a long period of time. And then there's soil. The big one is to really take from it is that the French don't even have a term called for winemaker. There is no French translation of winemaker. Their term, if you type in winemaker into Google Translate, it'll come back with vigneron. Vigneron is a vineyard owner and operator. And that's because for them, the winery is much more about capturing terroir than influencing it. You spend a lot of money having a terroir. You don't want to then go on change it effectively. Otherwise, you start losing all of that very expensive dirt that you own out the front. They do sometimes call themselves wine growers if they are using pure English. So this gets down to a little bit more of an expanded view on terroir. So this is getting towards what that means. And on the left, you've still got that temperature, hot and cold, but you've noticed that all of the regions have now spread out left to right. So, and it's based on a scale across this horizontal axis, which is soil pH. And it's really important. This is probably one of the main aspects of terroir to understand is soils are naturally quite acidic, thanks to rainfall, thanks to volcanic rock is acidic. And Australian soils are very old. So we have predominantly quite acidic soils. And the French vineyards are on predominantly mildly alkaline soils. Not all the soils, but the areas where the French are planted. And you think of the differences of wine between Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Rhone Valley, and then you look at this, you realize they're pretty similar compared to Australia. This doesn't mean the other regions produce bad wine at all. It actually means we've got incredible diversity of wine. But for us to try and replicate our French forebears, seeking that French terroir, seeking to be over in this area was really important. And I'll explain how that all sort of comes together shortly. So Champagne, fairly famous name, and interesting location, obviously right next to Paris, which had a large influence on how early it was as tended. It's been, a main invasion route to France. It's been pulled out, bombed, blown up. Pretty much all the towns in Champagne are rebuilt post-World War I. The soils, as you may remember, are quite interesting. And one second, I'm about to have sorry, I've got my daughter who's, hold on a second. This is like, as we're saying, there's some great advantages of okay, hold on a second. Can you go to Mummy and ask her to do this, please? We're about to, I'm outsourcing this problem to the other half. Okay, so where were we? So we're talking about the different areas. So quite simply, there's some things to remember here about France and Champagne is divided up into these sub-appellations. And obviously Champagne itself is the region, and it's quite a substantial region. But the big ones here to really focus on Côte de Blanc, Montagne de Reims, and Vallée du Marne. And they are really, the way to think about it is Montagne de Reims is Pinot Noir, Vallée du Marne is Pinot Meunier, and Côte de Blanc is Chardonnay. Massive generalization, but in reality, that's sort of the way that it's broken out. So Blanc de Blanc, you've already seen, is obviously mainly from Côte de Blanc, Vallée du Marne. So Pinot Meunier does have some Pinot Noir in there as well. It creates a little bit more of a smoky style of Champagne. And obviously the Montagne de Reims Pinot Noir produces the much more bold, much more fulsome styles of Chardonnays, also normally a little bit cheaper. So we're probably more familiar with them because that's the style we can afford. I don't know what everyone's budget is, but we can afford to drink them more often than the Côte de Blanc styles. So they're the three main areas. The rest are more blending regions. There are fantastic wine, vineyards in these areas, but they're mainly owned by the big maisons, the big houses. And they just blend them, and they just the wines disappear into the blend. So you've seen the step back. There are some reasons why the plantings in Champagne, but all regions are really reasonably controlled. To give you an idea, a vineyard in the Côte de Blanc, I'll go back here, was worth $3 million a hectare. So if it was monetarily like that, the natural expectation is that you would keep planting, you keep expanding production. But the French can't expand production. They have a couple of times in Champagne where they've found some more areas that are similar to, but you can't just wholesomely plant vineyards in every paddock and hope to attain the same pricing, the same appellation respect, because of two main trends, and they're sort of given away a little bit by these purple lines, and I'll explain dashed lines, and I'll explain a little bit about them as we go along. So you can see it's sort of sweeping around Loire and Beaujolais, up Burgundy, around Champagne. The other one's more around Bordeaux. It's a repeat, sorry. So the way that gives it away is that if you're looking at climate, obviously, and temperature, they're those factors. But if you remember, soil in terroir is really important. Soil is a geological feature. Soil is millions of years in the making, sometimes hundreds of millions of years in the making. And you'll notice here that we've now put a geological map over where those squiggly lines were. And you see these two areas called Paris Basin and Aquitaine Basin. And you have to transport yourself back about 150 million years ago. And this is when this was a great continent, supercontinent of Pangaea. And as it started to break apart, water rushed into the fissures and the shallow, I guess the low points, and they formed and created these very shallow seas that were called basins. And along those coastlines, you didn't have tiki lounges, and Sam Neill wasn't around at this period of time, but you did obviously have coastlines, and they're really important. But so just imagine shallow, warm sea coastline. And shallow, warm seas, you get a lot of plankton. So the food of whales in particular. And along coastlines, you get shellfish, Sydney Harbour, Hawkesbury, and the like. And they obviously leave behind over tens, hundreds of millions of years, soil structures that are quite famous. Think of coal as I guess the descendant of dead trees and plants. Chalk is the descendant of plankton, and limestone is the descendant of shellfish. So Champagne is a little bit off the coast, and as the plankton died, it gradually built up layers and layers of chalk, and that was where You can see World War I trenches. That's why if you ever looked at the old footage, they had big white mounds around them because it was all the chalk that was being dug out. And Bordeaux, Loire, and Burgundy around the actual coastlines. This is actually the soil. You can see the fossilized shells within it. This is really important because if you're a bit of a gardener, you'll appreciate that soils being naturally acidic can be quite a hostile environment for a lot of plants. You might find your tomatoes and your vegetable patch out in the back garden may not be growing as well as you'd liked. And you might put a pH testing kit in and go, oh God, it's pH of 5. And what do? You don't surrender. You go to Bunnings and you buy some gardening lime. Or if maybe you get some, crush up your eggs that you have every morning and you throw it into the garden. Or if you're Tasmania, where your soils are quite acidic and you have a vineyard, you go and buy a lot of lime and you start throwing it out all across your vineyard. And it's called lime dosing. And what that does is it raises the pH level and it brings it up to that mildly alkaline, very slightly acidic 7.5 pH. And all it means here is, as you can see here, is that all these multivitamins that the vines or plants rely upon become more available, especially for vines. Now, some plants want more boron and copper and zinc, and you do see problems with boron deficiency, but most things are pretty good around this area here. And much like a human body, when it's got access to all the nutrients, you're going to be healthier. Your immune system's going to be more functional. So the same with vines. They have better skin. They have thicker skin, better color. They have more foliage. Their immune systems are more repellent of disease, especially these days as we seek to remove chemical intervention. So we try and become more organic, or at least trying to limit that influence. You want the vines to be healthy because its immune system can deal with a lot of the diseases and a lot of the problems. So the soils are more, I call the soils more efficient. And that's what the limestone and their chalk does. So all it does, they've found this out over thousands of years of trial and error. The Romans and everyone definitely planted, there was vineyards planted a lot more areas of France, but they're not planted there anymore because over time they got out competed. The wine wasn't that good. They got pulled out and it got returned to agriculture. Or if it was Burgundy and the Duke was trying to raise his army, he banned planting of vineyards on the valley floor where you could grow crops that could feed armies and push the vineyards up the hills, and then found out subsequently that made better wine. There's a reason for that, because more efficient soils mean you need less of it. So fuel efficiency is the use of less fuel to get from A to B. So these soils being more efficient means you don't need very shallow soils. So this whole mentality, of, you hear it sometimes in viticulture, we've got these deep soils, aren't they great? It's human psychology. That's not viticulture. I guess they're trying to gild the lily, so to speak. That's about, we like to think of ourselves like oak trees with deep roots and stability. Viticulture is a bit more like sheep. You want them struggling because that's really important for quality levels. You want the vine to be healthy. You want it to have enough nutrient, but you don't want deep soils. And there's a reason you don't want deep soils, is because the big difference between table grapes and wine grapes is water. So on the left is this bunch of really succulent, really refreshing table grapes, bought probably from, you can buy them from Coles, lovely, but they're not very flavoursome. I can guarantee if you were to come out in your vintage and you would start eating as many wine grapes as you do table grapes, you'll actually start feeling sick. They're very, very flavoursome, which is not that enjoyable when you have too many. Lovely to have a couple with, maybe mixed in with some food. They're designed, you want them as small as possible, because what that does, it increases the proportion of skin to juice. And skin is so important for flavor and structure. Rosé is red wine without skin. You don't really need to sort of say much more that it has a massive part to play in quality wine. But you get a more concentrated juice. So it's less diluted. So the flavonoids, all the important functions of great wine are more concentrated. So water. So deep soils, what we're trying to get out of here is the shallow soils means when it rains, it's only a small amount of moisture is retained. Deep soils, well, you can have 3, 4, 5 meters of moisture retained. The vine just keeps drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking. And the grapes get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and they look more like on the left. So to give you an idea, if you want to proof always in the pudding, Louis Roeder or Cristal, here's their vineyard, 50 centimeter deep soil. It's very shallow. But the soil is in the Côte de Blanc, that area which is $3 million a hectare, can get down to 30 centimeters deep soil. So there's almost no soil there. But that's sufficient because the soils are efficient for the vine to be healthy, but the grapes become very water stressed. They get small, the vine's happy, healthy, able to reject disease, but the fruit, on the other hand, suffers dramatically. Anyone here got $17,000 for the Jeroboam? So in a nutshell, this is really it. We call it the Holy Grail. I call it Holy Grail. So it's interesting, isn't it? So the family story is obviously the Comte de Graal. Blanchefleur is one of the main characters. She's the lady in the castle that the knight Perceval rescues and falls in love with, Perceval, which is the name of our Pinot. And you can see it here is this is sort of the pathway to it. The pathway to the Fisher King, so to speak, is limestone creates that efficient neutral soil, healthy, happy vine, means you don't need very deep soils, water stress, thirsty grapes, smaller berries, and you get an enhanced wine. This is what the French discovered through trial and error over thousands of years. So for us, obviously, a little bit different. We don't have a couple of thousand years to work it out. We're a family business. We are able to think, and we do think in generations. And we're planting varieties now that my daughters will enjoy more so than I will. 10, 15 years away, of good grapes, good vines, and then probably another 10 years of the wine aging, 25 years. I'll be putting on a bit more age by then. But you are thinking that longer term scale. But we don't have thousands of years. I was a bit cheeky. These are some famous Burgundy regions. All I'm saying is that's the diameter of the earth. So we're straight down from Burgundy. So all of these factors sort of bleed together a little bit of what we were looking for. And this was our mentality when we went out to look. You got to remember, Australian viticulture was established mainly by the English with Busby in the Hunter Valley. The Italians got involved, but they more came from a fruit production perspective in and around obviously the big irrigation areas. Although the Italians themselves, especially in northern Italy, make some of my favorite wines around Langhe, in particular up in Piedmont. They do have a very similar aspect, but they weren't a lot of the people who came to Australia. They came out as fruit growers. So they were looking at broad acreage, big production, or the Germans. And the Germans sort of got it. If you're looking at, remember that chart before, the pH, the Barossa Valley, Coonawarra in particular, Limestone Coast have all got limestone underneath them. They've got the same pH, but just a lot warmer, about 3 or 4 degrees warmer than the regions we were looking for. But they had that mentality because terroir is very important in German viticulture, especially along the Rhine Valley, where it gets really ridiculously specific. The French have never really been actively involved in the development of viticulture in Australia for the simple reason that during the establishment of Australia, we had a couple of things like Trafalgar and Waterloo. We weren't exactly the welcome immigrants back 200 years ago in Australia. Things have changed a little bit since then, thank God. And for us, I guess we've come at this from a very French approach. So this is the vineyard. It's 1.5 kilometers long, goes over the next hill. You can't see it down to the river. It's about 0.5 kilometer wide. And it's a big vineyard. It's 53 hectares, what my parents planted. And yeah, it's a big move because we're down in Rylstone. So Rylstone, to give you an idea, it's on the road to Mudgee. It's between Lithgow and Mudgee. So it's about 3 hours drive from Sydney. It's 50 kilometers from Mudgee, which is the next nearest vineyard, especially when we planted. It's now a little one not far away from here, but we were out on our own. Our family started making wine in the Yarra Valley in 1970. So we're originally Victorians. And they thought we were nuts to go out and start a new region. They're like, you can't share equipment. You can't share labor. You're by yourself. There's no cellar door trail. You don't have the buses turning up, dropping in, going, oh, great. I just need to go to 8 wineries today, A, B, C, D, E, F. We had to take an approach, and I call it more the field of dreams, build it and they will come. I don't know if you remember Kevin Costner's movie with the baseball players digging in the cornfield. called an idiot for doing it. That was pretty much what my parents did. I am recording this. I've just called them an idiot. It's probably not going to go down well. But the point is we came here. We could have still gone to other cold areas, Orange or the like, but we made these decisions. So first part was obviously looking for cold areas. This is where I was saying before, that latitude equation. We're in Tasmania, we're cold and everyone is nonsense. Altitude has just as much part to play. Stanthorpe up here on the Queensland border is as cold as Tasmania because it's very high altitude. So you're looking for zone 7, which you see a reasonable amount of it in southeast Australia. Zone 8 is just too cold. That's alpine. It's hard enough to grow grapes in zone 7, let alone zone 8. Good luck. Zone 6, zone 5 are probably getting down to more Spanish and Southern Italian varieties. And that's why you're seeing a large move, especially in places like the Hunter Valley and some of the warmer areas, to more Spanish varieties. And that will make magnificent wine because they will be better evolved for the environments they're planted in. So zone 7, yeah, we started looking through zone 7. Rylstone, as you can see here, we've got some pretty cold temperatures. You also saw that it's a fair way inland. So that distance is hard to see in the map of Australia. It's easier in France. It's about 150 kilometers from the coast, but we're on the west side of the ranges, so we get that diurnal variation. So our probably most horrific day was 2 years ago. It was minus 14 in the morning, and it was positive 15 in the middle of the day. So a 31-degree temperature variation. So you start out looking like Scott of the Antarctic, and in the middle of the day, you're straight out of trying to think of the Bee Gees or something like that with a singlet on. So the point is maybe not Bee Gees. I was trying to think Queen. Sorry, running around with a white singlet on. That's pretty much it. Then you've got to quickly put the parkas and everything back on in the evening. But what that means is we've got a similar temperature here to Burgundy, but interestingly, we've got a really similar temperature to Champagne, and that's sort of why we started making these sparklings that we did. So the next, so no, you can actually see down there, Alexandra. So the next part of this is really was the most important one, why we didn't establish in these other cool climate areas. And it goes back, so the French story is 150 million years ago. This is 450 million years ago or thereabouts. It's called the Ordovician era. Only thing to remember really about that era is the era of shellfish and invertebrates. That was pretty much the dominant life form on Earth was shellfish. And rather than Pangaea, which is the story of Burgundy and the like, we're Gondwanaland, the great southern continent, which wasn't that southern. It had Africa and Amazonia and the like. And if you look off to the east, was this chain of volcanoes, and they were off the coast of the eastern part of Gondwanaland. And on the leeward shore of those, you didn't have large swells. The seas were quite quiet, placid even. And in those waters, you have the ability for the development of coral reefs and shellfish along the coast. So it's very hard to have shellfish on crashing surf, much easier on tidal eddies and bays, or in this situation on the other side from these great ocean swells would have been enormous coming in. And that laid down a layer of limestone. So this is 450 million years ago. So the problem you confront is that 450 million years, there's been a lot happened since then. So one is where we are in Sydney right now in the Blue Mountains is 200 to 250 million years old. It came out of the ocean. So you've had these other geological activities which have covered it. So it disappears, it's hard to find. But in certain areas, the limestone comes pretty near the surface. And rather than walking around with a pH testing kit, because you don't want that limestone 10 to 20 meters below surface, you want it as close as possible because you want that pH influence on the topsoil. You don't want it on the subsoil way down. So it needs to be half a meter to a meter deep to sort of integrate itself with vines, especially as their root zones are most effective between 20 and 60 centimeters deep. So you're looking for stuff out on your surface. And there are geological maps of Australia, but good luck to you interpreting them right down to every farm paddock out there in the East Coast. And so what you do is you go and you look around for cement mining. And cement is crushed up limestone. And if you're mining cement, it's got to be near the surface. It's not very expensive. It's not gold. So what we did was looked around for cement mines, and one of the most famous cement mines in Australia was the town of Kandos. And Kandos Cement built the Harbour Bridge, it built most of the buildings in Sydney. And Kandos, you can't see it on this map here, is right next to Rylstone. It's 3 kilometres from Rylstone. And it's actually, it's along here, somewhere along here. And there's a big quarry there. And we looked around there, we found our own little valley, and limestone comes to surface or down to 1/2 metre deep with a nice shallow topsoil. And that was sort of gave the game away to us. And we've been lucky since. So that was the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams moment for us. So that was sort of a bit of the background. Combining the two, our approach into the viticultural side, bringing it back to the actual wine, but it's important because it sets the foundation for how the French look at it, from Champagne, from Burgundy, from Bordeaux, Loire Valley, Alsace. They've all got limestone in their soil. You can start seeing some of the important factors, but really that's all brings this chart here together. As you said, the Germans they got it as well. That's why it just so happens that Barossa Valley and Coonawarra, it's just interestingly, these are averages. They do go out higher and they do go lower. So there is stuff out this way as well. I have to do regions. I don't have vineyard specifics. I got us vineyard specific, but I don't have their vineyard specific. But you can see the Germans were out here as well, just a little bit. But interesting, Coonawarra is pretty cool, but most of it, Barossa and the like, is quite warm climate. So taking that in our stride, let's talk a little bit about sparkling, because you've got the foundation behind it. You've got to be cold. You need that high acid fruit, which comes from cool climate, especially with Chardonnay. So what does everyone thinks of Champagne? Champagne is just the region. The French use the term Cremant. Cremant just means sparkling. So the actual term for Champagne that we all call the Champagne is actually Cremant de Champagne, sparkling of Champagne, but it became easier just to call it Champagne. It's otherwise known as a lot of other names. They're all the same, with the exception of production techniques. They're all using different fruit, which is the really interesting part about sparkling, is it doesn't just have to come from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. As I said, all French regions make Cremant. So Bordeaux, Burgundy, Loire, they all have sparkling. Burgundy makes quite nice sparkling because it's the same varieties as Champagne, and there are some areas up the north which are right up there. Literally, there's a line on one side of the valley is Burgundy producing Chablis, and pretty much the other side of the line is Champagne producing Champagne. So there's not a lot of difference between some of those. There's really good money to be made buying Burgundy Cremants. But interestingly, we make 3 sparklings. We're going to make a 4th soon, which will be a long extended time on lees, double aged, more like the Grand Vin, the big, very famous champagnes that need a lot more time and money and investment. But we already made a Blanc de Blanc, and we make a Prestige Cuvée, which you've got there. There's no point us replicating those with a 3rd one and a 4th one and a 5th one. We've already got enough wines in our portfolio. So we've got a fair amount of Cabernet planted on our site, which we've used to make our Cabernet wines. It's we planted a lot of Cabernet because that first question for us was, we need to have a big vineyard because we're out by ourselves in the middle of nowhere. We can't share anything. You need economies of scale. You need to have enough vineyard to be able to afford to have your own equipment, to afford to employ your own teams of people. But 55 hectares, there's no way we envisaged that we would produce and sell the equivalent of 35,000 cases, which is what that produces. We thought maybe we could produce a couple of thousand. So we took the view that we planted fruit to sell. And it's a good approach because effectively you plant, you sell to other wineries, you get cash now. You don't have to put aside the large amount of money in building inventories. And in the 90s, there was no desire for Chardonnay. It was the anything but Chardonnay era. Pinot Noir wasn't the trendy variety it is these days. The main styles, like we were not long out of being a fortified producer in Australia. And the main premium wines had only just been really pioneered by the likes of Len Evans and James and Halliday, with Broken Wood and Rothbury. It's only 20 years after the really early pioneers of like Chester Osborne and Cudkay and the like in South Australia. So the varieties that were famous back then were Semillon from the Hunter, Coonawarra and McLaren Vale Cabernet, and Barossa Shiraz. So what did we plant? We planted Semillon because that's what everyone wanted to sell. We planted Cabernet, Merlot, which is the other Bordeaux variety. It's a great blending variety for Cabernet, and interestingly, a lot by itself. And we planted Shiraz, intending to sell. And as we've grown the fruit and seen the wine, the quality of the fruit, we've made wines from them. And luckily we have, because we won best wine in Australia from our sweet Semillon. Cabernet Sauvignon's best, top 1% of wines in the world. We're on Cool Climate Trophy for our Shiraz Viognier. So with experimentation, the French have got this region, this wine, very controlled, very constricted appellation rules. They've sort of gone too far to the point where they can't do anything innovative, and it's going to cause them problems with, warming areas in Bordeaux and maybe lower rainfalls. They're already talking about, can we put irrigation in? We'd like to, but they can't. But for us, we can innovate as much as we want because we're not constrained by them. And if you remember, Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne actually aren't that different. The biggest difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy is Bordeaux's on the coast, Burgundy's inland. So with that, with our Cabernets, we also were looking, going, well, what's sparkling? So no one in Australia does this yet. They probably will. But Bordeaux does make some sparkling. Not a lot, because their wines are phenomenally expensive as well. You're talking, the region of Latour and Haut-Brion wines are thousands of dollars. You don't innovate or experiment a lot when your wines are expensive. Why would you? Yet last year, the wine that won best wine of Bordeaux, that beat all these great Bordeaux wines, was a Cremant de Bordeaux, and it was Louis Vallon. It's really lovely. We didn't know this. We already had decided we're going to make sparkling from our Cabernet. And the reason, as I said, it goes back to acidity. You want a really high level of acidity. And Cabernet is traditionally a very acidic variety. So when you drink a red Cabernet, you notice it right at the front of your palate, you notice at the back. So the front of the palate is the most activated area due to acid. So particular malic and citric acid at the front. And so that's why Cabernet really pronounced at the front, because of its high level of natural acidity. And at the back, because that's to do with the skin thickness, the skin tannins. So tannin activates the back of your throat, gives it the length in particular. You're not going to notice that with a sparkling, because you've obviously taken the skins out of the situation, so you've reduced the skin tannin. But you end up with these really high levels of acidity. So interestingly enough, this wine is much more acidic than the Blanc de Blanc you had at the start. So which is a Chardonnay harvested in line with the specifications of a Champagne sparkling. So it just has a lot more character, because Cabernet is a much bigger variety. Even though you've removed the skins, you're still going to capture parts of it. There is still an interrelation between the juice and the skin. And that's where this one's been really interesting. So this is the Annabelle. It's named after my daughter, who came along before and really wanted me to fill up a milk bottle. Danger problem for me is that this was a great family strategy of naming a wine after the first grandchild. Now we've got another grandchild. It means we're going to have another wine. Fortunately, we've got a Pinot Gris coming out before Christmas. It's our first ever, so we've always been selling that fruit. So that will be her wine. I hope it's as good as this one. So yeah, this one's been really fascinating for us. A lot of sommeliers love it because it's got some flavor and character to it. So if you're looking, we do when you're working with sommeliers and degustations, you're looking for wines to go with dishes. So it may not always be a staple wine, but it's been doing surprisingly well, matching up with a lot of the dishes of effectively things which I would have naturally put with a Pinot. So your fattier fish and maybe your leaner meats. It's magnificent in that position. Yeah, it's really interesting. I find it fascinating. I'll be interested to see now, because initially people were like, it's ridiculous that you make a Cabernet sparkling. Well, now that the best wine from Bordeaux was a sparkling, that attitude's probably likely to change sometime in the near future. So breaking back down, I guess, a little bit I'm sort of breaking it up. So if you like to drink some of the wines, or you're drinking the wines, you sort of understand ours or the evolution of them. But I guess back to a little bit about Champagne, because let's be honest, this controls the majority of our interest when it comes to sparklings. Is you got to think of them in three groups. Now there are three groups. You've got your Maison, which are the most well known. There's a natural reason for that. They're big, They're normally owned by your massive mega companies. It's interesting. I was talking to friends. I've got a lot of French friends in Australia and who are senior executives who have been posted here for a number of years, and they all work for fabulous companies. Because if you look at I think it's the CAC 40, most of it is fashion, luxury, food, fragrances, or wine or spirits. But the biggest companies in France are of these categories. Most of the Australian biggest companies are banks, miners, insurance and superannuation funds. So very different approach. But these companies obviously are their mega companies. They have a lot of money, branding, marketing, and they can really push their brands out there. So they're broken up into 3 categories. And what I guess the way to think of them is a vineyard. So I say a vine or a hectare produces, in this situation, say 8 tons. 8 tons of fruit is probably a good benchmark for a good vineyard. Of that 8 tons in sparkling, you're probably going to get 55 cases. So say you're going to get about 450 cases to the hectare. The average vineyard size in Champagne is 1 hectare. You start doing the math. 450 cases is not a lot of money. So you don't have the marketing power. And so there's been an evolution thanks to the inheritance laws in France as well, which make it 45% tax on anything over, I think it's almost 2 million euro. Now, if you remember that a vineyard in the Côte de Blanc costs 3 million euro, you're already paying a 45% tax on the next generation inheriting it. So there's a natural evolution to things shattering and breaking up or being sold off for tax dollars. So the big maisons are effectively founded around a lot of these premises. They source their grapes from all over. So they're not terroir producers. So this is one of the few areas in France. So I say to a lot of sommeliers, I speak to a lot of restaurant managers, name the top 10 Australian winemakers. And pretty easy to do if you know your wine. Okay, now name the top 10 vineyards. Pretty much no one can name. They can name a wine label, like, yeah, but where's its vineyard? Do you know anything? Oh, no, oh, yeah, I've been to the one that's down the Mornington Peninsula. Do you know its characteristics? No, it's very hard to explain it. Now go to France and say, who are the top 10 winemakers? Most sommeliers in Australia or anywhere in the world, like, maybe Marcel Guigal, well, he died 40 years ago. And, but name the top 10 vineyards, Domaine Romani Conti, like that. You can name them off pretty simply. It's a very different approach. These guys, this is one of the few areas where they're chef de cave. So they're the sparkling masters. They are like Australian winemakers. They are rock stars. They do work overtime because they're blending together hundreds of champagne vineyards to try to make a consistent product, that non-vintage product that effectively is the same year in, year out. And there's a reason for that, economics. A restaurant doesn't want to have to rearrange a wine every single year. You want to know that your Bollinger is your Bollinger and it doesn't change. So it's good, it's really good, but you don't want it to be good this year, bad next. Like, it's terrible to sell it. You have to rewrite your lists. So you're looking for consistency. So those chef de cave work overtime to achieve that outcome, much like Australian winemakers. They have 100 vineyards. They're trying to make a bin 707 the same every year, because with not the same, but there's some variation, but nothing like the variation of a single vineyard. And that takes a lot of effort. That's real. You've got to go to uni. You've got to study hard. You've got to understand your chemistry beyond 101. So they're broken down. I always find this a bit of fun because everyone's always got bottles around. Sometimes is to understand the 3 categories of the maison. You've got NM, which is négociant manipulant. Now these guys effectively are a producer who buys their grapes from vineyards around themselves. They create a champagne house. This is the basic champagne house. So your Bollingers, Melton Chandon, your Veuve Clicquot, NM. So you then go down to it's market d'acheteur, which is effectively a buyer's own brand. It sounds pretty bad. Sometimes they can be. Aldi champagne might be an example, up to fashion houses that have their own champagne. So they buy fruit and they put their label on it, and so they're not making it. They're effectively buying finished wine and rebadging it. Normally surplus wine is often the case. And then there's négociant distributor, who's just a distributor. It's got nothing to do with anything to do with the process. So it's not their brand, not their fruit. Not that. That's more just pure distributor. They just label it sometimes. That's about it. These are traditionally the cheaper mass market end of the market, but still some premium stuff there, especially in the NM stage. But you'll see it. It's interestingly, they don't. If you're looking for this on the bottle, you'll normally see it on the back in tiny print underneath the barcode, because they're trying to hide it from you. There's not cachet to be in this category. The next category is obviously cooperative. So as I said, a lot of the vineyards are very small, that 1 hectare, 450 cases, perhaps. And that's sort of the one way of getting around that is you form a cooperative. So what these guys do is so Nicolas Fouillet, or Nicky Fou, as it's slang called in the industry, is the biggest cooperative. So it effectively has the whole territory around a village, most of it, and all of them pool their resources together and create a central label. And that's the cooperative Manipulant. And they're great wines. They've got enough terroir influence because they're generally quite closely grown together. So the negotiate Manipulant can be from the north and the south and the east and the west, can be from anywhere in Champagne. These guys actually have to be fairly concentrated together. So Palmer & Co., Champagne Collet, they're magnificent, very expensive. And I think probably in the area that you're probably more likely to access at the very top end of Champagne. Then you move across to the Vigneron. These are the grower champagnes that are very cult-like. They are the rock stars. There are a lot. There's probably 150 to 200 that are right up there. If you can get your hands on them, they are phenomenally good, phenomenally expensive too. Very small quantities. So what you're looking for there, it's called Récoltant Manipulant, and that is effectively a grower and a producer. He's got, just like in Burgundy, he's got his own shed, harvests the fruit, takes it there, presses it, crushes it, presses it, and ferments it, bottles it, does all the work. And these are your top category up here. You can see them, Jacques Celos and Calzac. They are rock stars. Like you will see, if you see RM on your champagne bottle, if someone's given you a bottle with RM on it, be very thankful. It's very rare. It's hard to get. And obviously status symbol champagne. So if you're dining with the Queen or someone like that, you're more likely to get an RM, surprisingly, even though the others are. But for the rest of us, probably I'm probably over here in the MA group. The next one is it's called Society de Récoltant. These are union of growers. So it goes back to, you grow it. It's about understanding that you don't have the resources at the smaller end to do everything. So these guys, they're not like cooperative. They don't sell it all in and create a label. What they do is they maybe have a winery they all share together. They'll have a village winery, a village press, village tanks and fermentation, and but they maintain their own fruit. So they each put their grapes through the process, and it goes to their own tanks, and they put their own labels on it. This is the really micro end, and there's still some magnificent wines in here. There's also some pretty ordinary. The diversion between good and bad is very wide in these categories. And the final, which is Récoltant Cooperative, which is effect cooperative. So these are people who grow but don't have facilities. So they're probably a little bit bigger. They probably ring up. There's always excess capacity. So once you've pressed your fruit, like, pressing cycles, especially if you're using modern pressing cycles, is a couple of tons, 4.5 hours. And if you're producing 8 to maybe 20 tons, you're talking there, 10, 40 hours, so a couple of days work. Then you've got this very expensive bit of kit there. So if you're smart, you start saying, hey, Johnny, do you want to put your stuff through mine and pay me some money to use it? And maybe we'll even make it. Maybe you just want to focus on grape growing, but we'll give you back your label. Okay, so that's RC. That can still be fantastic. So really you're looking here at very big end, which is most of Champagne, the maisons, the cooperatives, which are probably the premium. There's premium all across this, to be honest. But in terms of, I guess, the wine industry, the insider knowledge, the cooperatives, if you get a Champagne Collet, you'd be very thankful. Palmer & Co., interestingly, that's what Justin Hems named his bar underneath. Establishment Palmer & Co. after the Champagne. And then you're really identity-driven rock star champagne families over on the far right, like D'Souza as well as should be there. Oh no, D'Souza's relegated down. They've moved across because they've had to do it for tax reasons. So how is champagne made? So the three main ways of making champagne. Easiest is the carbonation, the soda stream method. Just put a large amount of carbon dioxide into it. Don't need to say anything more about that. We've all had passion pop at one stage in our life. Then the two methods was the Cremant method and the traditional method. So Cremant method and traditional method. So Cremant method is probably more, if you were looking around the world, Prosecco, most of it's Cremant method. And a lot of sparklings in Australia are Cremant method. So effectively you make the wine. So primary fermentation is make the wine. Secondary fermentation is creation of fizz. So it's the use of sugar and yeast under oxygen less or anaerobic conditions. Produces all that carbon dioxide. You capture it. They cool it and filter it. And then they do this dosage at the end, which is important. I'll explain that next. And then they bottle it. So they're bottling under pressure. So it's really, so they're using the same process as traditional method. It's interesting, when I'm looking at these charts, there's a little bit of, natural bias here, is that it's got a barrel. And let's be honest, you don't see barrels much in champagne or sparkling anymore, but they try and make it look much more upmarket. And you got your first barrel, you have your production of the cuvee, the free run juice, which is cuvee there. 70% of effectively the press, that really early stage. They use tirage, which is, so you make the wine, then you put it in that still wine in the bottle. You then apply a yeast and sugar to it in the bottle. And then you lay it on its side, and you will have all seen those riddling boards and all the movies and when you've been to Champagne, and it ferments in the bottle. And you gradually riddle it. Now riddling, and this is where the important difference is as yeast dies, it lays down what's called lees. Now it's why you hear a lot called sur-lees in wine production. It's effectively the time that the wine spends exposed to dead yeast cells. And so dead yeast is protein, and it's when yeast interacts with wine, it's called autolysis, but effectively it introduces various yeasty notes to wine that create some really interesting characteristics. And in champagne, it creates that toasty brioche style that you're really looking for in the premium. So your really high-end premium sparklings smell like a bakery because, bakery is all about yeast and everything like that. And especially as they get older, as some of the fruit-driven flavors start to fade away. And so with traditional method, the wine is exposed in the bottle, and you're gradually riddling down that dead yeast, which forms that sediment, that lees at the bottom of the bottle. And then what you do is you then stick it in ice, well, not ice, but you're in a snap chill, and you freeze that. And because it's under pressure, you use the pressure the way you seal this is with a crown seal, a beer bottle cap, and you freeze it, and then you crack the beer bottle cap, the pressure explodes it out of the bottle, and it clears that yeast. You then you then put a cork in, but before you put dosage, so you top it up with a little bit of liqueur and a little bit of dosage, which I'll talk about. So the big difference here is that every bottle has a large influence of yeast, whereas here only the bottom of the tank has exposure to the yeast with the Cremant method. So that's really the defining feature of the difference between the two. Quite important, might I add, but nevertheless, it's a good way of understanding it. So under pressure bottling creates pressure in the bottle here. So hence this is the method of champagne, method traditionnel. We use this method, and it's supposed to produce the best quality of sparklings. So that's really the defining feature of them. So the only difference is, that bakery influence in the champagne from traditional method. Now, dosage is really important. I always loved the story of dosage. So dosage, if you remember, the English, when they first discovered sparkling, they used to add molasses to the wine to create the sparkling. That obviously a lot less. They were very sweet. And this is the scale back in 1882. So not that long ago, if you think about the evolution of wine. So the British used to mainly drink champagne as an aperitif, particularly back then. So they didn't want an overly sweet wine. So they were 22 to 66 grams of sugar. So this is dosage. Dosage is the addition at the end of wine. So you're trying to sweeten the wine up. So it's like the Romans did with adding herbs and spices. At the end, it's the same. You added sugar, purely cordial, to make the wine more enjoyable for the palates that day. American was 110 to 165. French and German champagnes were 165 to 200 grams. This is a lot of sugar. And the Russians were 275 to 330 grams. You know what a kilogram of sugar looks like, right? They've got a third of a bag of CSR sugar in their bottle of champagne. So to give you an idea, Coca-Cola is 113 grams of sugar per liter. So you know how everyone talks about how people's teeth these days are rotting with soft drinks. Well, let's just talk about what people who drank champagne's teeth were like back in the 1800s. So, and our sweet wine is between 150 to 200 grams. So they're our sweet wines. They're not even as strong as the Russian champagnes of 100 years ago. And that's like a sweet wine that we make intentionally to be sweet. So this was the scale. It's obviously changed a lot in the last 130 years. And it changed thanks to Madame Pommery. 1874, she made a champagne that was called Sans Sucre and had no sugar. And it actually became really trendy. And other people started following. Laurent Perrier, they all started making these Sans Sucre champagnes. So they still made the sweet champagnes, but they started introducing these dry champagnes, and they became more and more enjoyed. I think people's palates had changed. A lot of people, let's be honest, as you get older, your pure desire to have sugar diminishes. Your sweet tooth diminishes, and all of a sudden you've got a champagne that's a bit drier, a bit fresher. You're able to drink more of it. You're not, oh my God, I've had a pack of gummy bears every time I have a bottle of champagne. And so it became pretty popular, so much so that you've now got a new scale. I hope you can see.
Well, we can't hear you.
Sorry, you didn't miss anything. Okay, where did I lose you? You're probably more enjoyable looking at the screen going. So where was I? Where did I lose you? At this slide? Okay, what I was saying is where the English were back at, which was classified as very dry, is now classified as sweet these days. So the palate's really changed. Interestingly, I love this slide, only this diagram on the top left. You probably can't see it, but interestingly, it talks about the number of calories in champagne. There's almost none now in champagne. There used to be a lot more back in the day. So, Weight Watchers eat your heart out, champagnes you drink. So, and I've got down here a little comparison. We had that Coca-Cola of 113 grams a liter. So Jack and Coke, a margarita is 20. So it's always good to sort of see comparison. It's phenomenal what they used to drink. And on the right here, you can actually see these are the dosage levels of some of the great champagnes. So Genapier and Bollinger are known as the driest, and up to your Charles Heidsieck, which is probably, if you can see on their scale, extra dry. But no one is out at this greater than 50. Fascinating little tidbit was, remember how the Russians were really sweet? 275, like a third of a bag of CSR sugar every bottle. They still are really high. So France Champagne makes special champagne for Russia, and it's around 100 to 150 grams a liter. So they've gone drier. For them, they're much drier, but they are still stupidly sweet. So if you're drinking champagne in Russia, you're either drinking the French stuff or you're drinking the Russian stuff. And it was only about 4 weeks ago, Putin decreed that the French weren't allowed to call their product champagne any longer in Russia. That's like how you can do that. But apparently it had something to do with some decree a couple of hundred years ago, where like when the Empress or the Tsarina was given rights to produce champagne. So effectively what they're saying is champagne in Russia has to be this 100 to 150 grams a litre stuff. So I don't know. So if you see 2021 champagne, you're sitting in a bar in Moscow, be prepared for it being very sweet. So I don't know if they're going to win that battle, to be honest. I think the French champagne houses were like, we're not going to send you champagne. And let's be honest, there's a lot of oligarchs there with a lot of money who will probably not let that happen. So finally, rounding out the sparkling discussion. The last champagne is really interesting one. So it's a bit of a story. There's a slider bar here. I'm trying to move around so that I don't know if I can see what's on the slide. That's why I hit mute. One of the biggest consumers of champagne was Winston Churchill. Let's be honest, 2 bottles of champagne a day, and apparently a bottle of gin. He was obviously drank champagne in preference. He liked to drink it with food. And that with food, as you remember, the Blanc de Blanc is an aperitif style. It's not designed for food. If it is, it's super creamy cheeses, very light seafood like oysters, or very, very light fish like mahi-mahi or something like that. You really need that Pinot Noir influence or the Cabernet influence to start creating a bit more body, a bit more structure. And the aim here was to produce effectively a style of he wanted styles which had more Pinot in them. And he was introduced by the French ambassador to Odette Paul-Roger. They became very good friends. And she decided, obviously, the way to Winston's heart was to create Sir Winston Churchill champagne just for him initially, and it became really popular. Obviously, he drank it at every time he could possibly get it. Checkers, everyone started consuming it alongside him, and so we, with our Prestige Cuvée, were effectively going, well, we've got the Blanc de Blanc, obviously we've got the Cremant, the Bordeaux Cremant. We want to move a little bit more in our food matching down to those fattier fish again. Much more robust styles, and this is the Marie Louise. So it's still only 24% Pinot Noir. It's not a full Pinot Noir sparkling, but it's designed. It's got a bit more robustness, a little bit more lushness to it. It had a little bit longer time on lees, so it spent a bit more time with those dead yeast cells, getting a bit more of the bakery influence, as I call it, and it gave a much more richer style of sparkling. So when you get the chance, whether now or in future, we're thinking about and looking at this, thinking about remembering the Blanc de Blanc or looking at against the Blanc de Blanc to try and sort of see the size differential that you see on the palate. So that's really it. That's really the travel through champagne and sparkling and terroir and a lot of information. But that's why I like this medium, because normally when I'm talking about this, it's just verbal. You've got to keep up with what I'm saying. Here I get to actually show you a lot more. So like there with Victoria sort of showed, you don't need to hear me speak. You can just look at the slide and get enough information. So please, I didn't let anyone speak through the whole way. I didn't probably take breath. But please, if you've got any questions or comments, or have you found your bottles and seen if they got RM on them or NM? But thank you. You can unmute you all now if you want.
Allowed to talk. Spoke. I spoke.
I love to talk, or you love the talk?
She loved the talk.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
It was great.
Wow, that was very informative.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Think about.
Well, it's just champagne's like it's such an awesome topic. Like I wish when I'd done chemistry at school, they'd used alcohol as the explainer of like pH and geology. I think we all would have been like, oh, this is really interesting. Soils and rock. Wow. Instead they use like, there's a dinosaur bone at 20 meters down. And you're like, I got over those about 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, exactly. I would have liked geology much better.
I'll turn off share as well so we can. You can all see each other now, which is probably a little bit nicer.
Hi.
So what have you guys drunk? Have you drunk anything this evening that?
Yes.
Everything.
Everything.
A bottle.
3 bottles.
3 bottles. What was, after you've heard my talk, what do you think in terms of the difference in
Oh,
I just had that one.
you said the
I
one.
want to.
that's Eva.
Eva, you are by yourself. If you'd had 3, I would actually pay to stay here and watch what you'd probably be like.
No.
This is actually delicious.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
What's your
I had another.
wine?
Sorry, Victoria.
Apart from champagne, what's your best-selling wine?
Apart from sparkling,
You implied it was a red. Is that right?
if for one of our red wines, we do. God, we make so many wines now. They're all over 90 points, so they all get pretty well regarded. In terms of, I guess, our most famous at the moment is probably our Cabernet, our straight Cabernet Sauvignon, our Victor. So that's top 1% of wines in the world now. It sort of normally takes out a lot of awards, or it's really interesting because we're cooler climate than Bordeaux. It takes longer to ripen. That longer period it takes to ripen means that the fruit spends longer hanging on the vine, and what that does is it means the tannins ripen more. The way Cabernet is famous for is its tannins, and sometimes you see younger Cabernets and they can be quite bitter and hard to deal with, and you need to age them for a while for the tannins to sort of calm down, and sommeliers call it resolved, so the tannins need to resolve. But what's been discovered trial and error, we're still discovering things, is long hang time, the tannins resolve on the vine, so they soften on the vine, not in the bottle, and so you get these really beautiful, soft, delicate tannins at a young wine. And why that's important is Cabernet has got this beautiful cherry ripe aspect to it, and that's when it's young, when the acid's bright and fresh, the fruit's there. And what happens as a wine ages is that the acid starts dropping, the ethers start rising, and ethers in wine are more of those secondary characteristics. So you're talking like your leather and my brain's now leaving me. But the more wine type of the tobacco, eucalypt, those types of characteristics. So the problem for Cabernet is if you're waiting a long time for the tannins to resolve, you miss that cherry ripe aspect at the start, and you just get the eucalypt menthol, which is lovely, but it takes a long time. And a young Cabernet is beautiful. I don't know if you get the chance to have any Napa Valley Cabernets, like they nail it pretty well. So we're pretty close to Napa Cabernet. So our Cabernets, you've said in the Annabelle work well there. We do a red blend. I want to make a Bordeaux blend, which is, so Cabernet is left bank Bordeaux. So it's your Latours and the like, that style. Wines are designed for a lot of sinew and fat, so the tannins are able to sort of break down the proteins a lot more. Whereas I drink a fair amount of our Merlot Cabernet, which is right bank Bordeaux. It's more designed. It's really what I'm eating. So I'm braised, baked, slow cooking, because the tannin levels in Merlot are a lot lower. You don't need to break down the protein. So that's sort of the way my mind thinks. The future project for us is we're 5th vintage into our Pinot Noir, and we're still learning. We're making Cabernets now for 18 years, whereas with Pinots we're making for 4 to 5. So we've still got our trainer wheels on. We're still learning what we want to do, the oak, the yeast, the fermentation temperatures, the durations. And so for us, I guess that's the future of our winery, is naturally Pinot. But it's called the Holy Grail for a reason by a lot of wineries, like by far calls it the Sangreal. Tim Napstein almost went bankrupt because of Pinot Noir. It spent 12 vintages making it, throwing it out, making it, throwing it out. His accountant told him if you fail one more vintage, you're dead. And so that's the future. So in a red variety, the Cabernet, saying that our Shiraz Viognier, personal favorite, probably it's cool climate Shiraz is very peppery, and they discovered 450 years ago that if you put some Viognier with it, it would have been it was a discovery by mistake. Most wine discoveries are made by mistake. Probably people drinking too much of their own product, because Viognier is a white variety. You don't harvest white with red naturally, and especially you don't ferment them together. And that's what they did in this region. It's called the Côte Rôtie. It's northern Rhone Valley, just south of Burgundy. And they discovered that it made these peppery Shirazes, beautiful, long, silky, and that style became the most awarded wine style in history. Was one of the few winemakers that people know in France, called Marcel Guigal, and his wines were called the La La Las. So it's like La Turque. I can't remember the names. And I just know there was La La Las. They're all 100 pointers for about 30 years. And it was him who trained Tim Kirk to use Viognier with his Shiraz, and Tim Kirk's Clonakilla, which is now one of Australia's iconic wines. So, it's like, which is your favorite child? Victoria. It's well, I don't know. Maybe some people have that answer really nailed down. And some people probably based on the week.
What about, do you do Chardonnay as well?
Yes, we do Chardonnays. We do. So that was sort of, I guess, our entree to making sparkling. So our Chardonnays are very acidic initially. So one is a very fresh Petit Chablis school style. So it's very fruit driven, no oak, or 15% oak, no malo. So it's very fresh, very fruit forward. And we sell a lot of that. It's like a veranda wine. But then again, Three Hat restaurants sell it for about $90 a bottle, which I'm always blown away by. Its retail is like 35, but they do what they do. Whereas our other style is our reserve style, which is a little bit more classic Burgundy. So it's got more oak associated with it. It's stirred up. So it's called batonnage, the lees. So that lees we talked about, you stir them. So to try and get the lees through the wine. But in doing that process as well, you introduce oxygen into the wine, because you're stirring, effectively you're pushing air down into it unintentionally or intentionally. So you get a richer style of Chardonnay from that. From that, plus we've also undertaken some acid fermentation to reduce the acidity level, which makes them creamier in a cool climate, makes them buttery in a warm climate. We make sweet wines, and this has been our big issue. It's like where that last scene in The Castle where they bought they're up to like 8 tow trucks, and they're not sure how many more tow trucks. Maybe 10, maybe 12. We're sort of that. We're at 16 wines, and Dad and I are still like, and we're going to release a Pinot Gris this year, and next year I want to do like a reserve Pinot, and we're thinking maybe we'll do another Chardonnay, and it's like we're like, crap, we're going to be at 20 wines before we know it. And I'd sit there, and Isham, you're a restaurant manager. How many wineries turn up with 20 wines from one vineyard?
Hardly. Oh my God.
None.
No.
None. They focus on 2 wines, 3 wines. They walk in the door and go, here's my 3 wines. Which one do you want? And I sit there with a sommelier, and they're like, holy crap. But it does work in our favor. Like the number of winery vineyards, so my Queensland manager used to run Urbane, which was the #1 restaurant in Queensland for a long time. It was Three Hats. And he made us, we were their spotlight, and he had 12 of our wines on in a 3 Hat venue. And he actually said, you know what? I'm actually just going to, open our wine list, and there's going to be De Beaurepaire wines and our wines, and then you can fold through to the rest of the wine list. So it has its advantages, but it has its detractions, because as you're getting from me, it's hard for me to give a preferred wine. It's like, what are you having? It's by Victoria. What do you like to drink? And I can then pull out from the range something that you like to drink. So.
I've been a Chardonnay drinker and obviously, out of fashion.
No, my mum's a Chardonnay drinker. Nothing wrong with it.
I'm trying to drink red wine now, and I can't find something that I really, really like.
What do you want? Do you want a lighter red, or are you looking for longer?
Something that's velvet.
Velvet.
Like a cool red wine that just goes down like velvet.
Velvet, yeah. So that's it. So Cabernets would, but they're pretty big.
Something to try, and they go, so what do you like? And I go, I don't know.
Velvet. Merlot probably is.
Granger thought that was beautiful, but obviously I'm not going to pay that sort of money. And then they go, well, what do you want to spend? And I go, I know, around 30, maybe $40.
Yep.
And nothing I've had so many different wines, and I don't even know why I want to try red, but I think I do because I've never done it.
Yeah.
I think less of it.
Yes.
Not that I never drink at home, although I've nearly polished off this bottle, which is a bit apart from that, but I mean, I've always been a champagne drinker, and it's always been, Louis, Roederer, and Bollinger were two of my favourites.
Yep.
Cristal, I've only had probably 10 times in my life.
Yep.
Nada, I've had a lot, and and I really enjoyed this tonight. I was prepared not to actually. I didn't like it, which is a terrible thing to say to you.
No.
But
You don't know what these things are going to be like.
I would, because I am a real champagne drinker, and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I've drunk as I said, I'm almost halfway through the Prestige Cuvée.
Lost.
I'm having a very happy time all on my own. My husband said, "Settle down." Right, but I just want to try different things. Like I've been a vodka drinker, so now I'm trying to drink gin. I'm trying to change things around a bit. But and my brother is friends with Bill Taylor, so Mitchell Wines.
Yes. Yep.
My brother started collecting wine illegally, clearly, at the age of about 16, and he had a ton of wine. And every time I go there, I have a beautiful wine. And then when I ask him to advise me, he never really seems to. He goes, "Oh, well, I know. Go to the bottle shop. What's there? Doesn't help."
The problem with
trying to
wine.
educate.
The problem with wine is the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. It's like that. It's like the Alice in Wonderland. You keep going. There's another door, and there's another door, and each door has more doors coming off, and there's like it's just this. You're like, and it's almost like I wish to go back to simplicity. And I was lucky. When I was young. I knew Janie Tyrrell. We were friends. We used to hang out when we were young, and it's not hard these days. But we'd see Bruce around a bit, and Bruce, always had some good stories. And I remember one dinner, and we were drinking heavily into the wines, and it was like, "Oh, I'm jealous of anyone who drinks cask wine," and we're like, "What?" Like, deathly so. There's a bunch of wine kids on the table, and what are you saying, Dad? And he's like, "Well, because it's a cheaper habit, once you get into this game, the price starts going up, and you start becoming indecisive because you're like, do I want the Vouvray or do I want the Chambord Missignon? Do I want that?" It's like it becomes. It's actually a curse the more you know. And so that's probably why your brother is like struggling, because he's like, "Well, if it was the 2016, well, that was a good year, but no, the 2017 over there, just analysis paralysis."
He loves his wine, so he drinks wine that he's collected for years. So obviously, he would tell me, "We'll go and buy that $180 bottle of wine. It's perfect," and it probably would be.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really.
Merlot Cabernet probably would be good. Merlot would be good for you. Because of that middleness. It's known as lush. It's a lush style. It doesn't have the tannin.
Say that the last three wines I've had, I've actually got Merlot.
And did you like them?
I liked the last one I got was an Argentinian one, which was
interesting. Malbec
I ended up with that because I'm trying to support our local people, and they're all trying to sell their wines.
Yes.
And, I think it was about $40 or whatever.
Yep.
So, which worried me slightly, because if that was $40, if it was in the restaurant, it's probably their cheapest one.
That's the retail price. Yeah. Yep. It'd be 80 in the restaurant. Yep.
Yeah, I quite liked it. It was okay, but as I said, my palate's probably not a red wine palate. I'm trying.
Interesting. Well, Pinot can be. Oh, okay. Pinot is very specific. Pinot can be incredibly velvety, but that's expensive stuff. So most of it's very acidic. So Australian wines.
What's like an average to good? Like, are you talking $50, $60, $100?
Pinot's, you've got it. Yeah, Pinot's. You can go stupid money.
A bottle shop, not at a restaurant.
Yeah, bottle shop. Pinot, you can go stupid money. Merlot, I think Merlot for $30, $35, you're going to get a better Merlot than you're going to get most wines. So.
Or 30, 40 or whatever. But I just want to try a good one and know that I like it, and then I don't care.
I'll get you one of our Merlots, and you can then we'll benchmark you.
Done. Winning.
Done. Done. Easy.
Perfect.
So Will, I get beaten up a lot by my boys because they reckon I always drink wine in the wrong glass. Is there such an animal as the right glass?
Oh God. Well, if I was from Riedel, there's a glass for every wine. You need to buy more glassware. They actually came out last year and changed the whole school on what champagne glass you should drink. So the flutes were the flutes were the wine to have, and now it's gone back to the goblet, you know, the
Oh,
old Gatsby goblet. So effectively, I looked at that and I did laugh because it means that everyone who actually follows their glassware is now going, crap, we're going to spend another $300 in champagne glasses for the house.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Riedel has gone, this is a genius. We'll change it back to flutes in 5 years. But there is a reason, because obviously the more surface area means that the wine, obviously you want to oxidize the wine a little bit when it's in your glass. Like oxidation creates vinegar, but it's also, you know, it releases the volatile acids. So, you know, you get the, you know, it's perfume effectively. So it's to do with temperature, and it's to do with the amount of surface area. And so some wines, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It is noticeable. We have, like, if you come to our cellar door, we use Riedel standard for everyone, and then we have like our VIP tasting where we've got the premium different glass for every wine, and you do notice the difference. A lot of it, it's one of those things. It's like when you go to a great cellar door and you buy the wine, you get home and it doesn't ever taste as good. Like, how much of it's suggestive reasoning? You just go, I'm having it in a better glass.
Yeah.
It's a better wine. How much is it really better? I don't know. Like restaurants, you guys use plum or Riedel, and there's some standard wine glasses that I think, look, if you're going for that classic Bordeaux style with a big surface area, you're pretty safe with 90% of wines. There may be some marginally bit better by having a Burgundy glass and a Chardonnay glass. Like, to be honest, I've never had them until last year when I was walking through one of these department stores. I was looking for a present, and that was like after New Year's. And I've never really got into the New Year's Day sales. I never really liked shopping with crowds. And there was like this incredible deal off on all these crystal different wine glasses. I actually went berserk, and I've now got a Chardonnay glass, a Burgundy glass, Bordeaux glass, some sweet wine glass. And I came home and I'm like, look what I've got. And you know, now I'm just too hesitant to actually open them. So I'm worried about my friends breaking them. But I drink them by myself normally. So in a nutshell, I think maximize surface area.
Froze now.
yeah.
I have this problem. But I can't get on internet.
Sorry?
Frozen.
Oh, she's frozen.
She's frozen. She's just sitting very still.
So I was going to ask, because on the shape of the wine glass,
Yes.
is it true that the champagne glasses used to be a sort of wide goblet,
the goblets?
rather than what we drink out? Yeah.
Yeah, you remember the Gatsby movies where they'd have the stack of champagne glasses up in the pyramids? Yeah, so that's the style they recommend again now. So it goes back to that increased surface area to the air, to oxidize, to release the volatile acids, to make them to get more aromatics, more perfume. Problem is they go flat fast, and that was the reason behind it. So there is a bit of probably collusion between champagne houses and Riedel. Riedel wanted to sell more glassware. Champagne houses wanted you to drink more. So, you know, the goblets goes flat, better drink it fast, better get another refill. So
Same surface area of a glass like that.
that's well, in the new
I was really.
the new school is you're supposed to upgrade, Victoria. You're supposed to go back to the goblet.
Yeah.
No.
I don't have any goblets downstairs, so but you have a lot of people actually. Like when I'm doing tasting top soms.
Chocolate mousse as well.
Sorry.
Great for chocolate mousse as well.
Correct. Great for martinis and but yeah, most som, like if I go and talk to an A-grade som, they're normally carrying around a Bordeaux glass, and champagne tastes fine in that too. Like, you know,
Yeah.
It's packaging. I don't know. I'll get Mark Balderstone on next time. He's the managing director of Riedel. I know him well. He can sell you all new glassware. It's like Reader's Digest. It's been the new Amway. I should tell him that.
Go around.
I was lucky enough to go to Champagne a few years ago now.
Yes.
And I remember them telling me the story about the glasses before they did the disgorging on a regular basis. There used to be a lot of sediment in Champagne, apparently.
Yes.
You would know better than I. And the glasses then were that shape you were talking about, but they had a design around the outside, like a pattern. And that was to hide all of that sediment that sat at the bottom of the glass.
Wow.
Doesn't surprise me. It
Oh,
doesn't surprise me at all. Like they're yeah. So sediment one is it's we've obviously improved disgorgement. You know, the way that we do it with the crown seals, and you know, back in the day they wouldn't have had crown seals. It probably would have been cork, and it would have been more. You know, 9 out of 10 would be perfect. 1 out of 10 wouldn't. And rather than return it to the whole riddling process, they'll just go, "Oh, that's fine," and ship it out. But yeah, the glass, yeah. There's some of the stuff with glassware, like the discoveries they did with regard to like the grooves to make them bubble, and that's it, I guess, as well, is a lot of normal glassware. If you put it in and it's got some soap suds in there, it won't have much bubble. So a lot of the flutes and everything have all of the grooves to make them spiral and look pretty. So this is one of those things. I don't know the full answers. All I can say is when I look at top soms, they're normally just walking around with a Bordeaux glass with everything in it. So, bigger the better. Maybe also because they're alcoholics and they want a bigger glass. So
yeah. I got another question. You mentioned the word buttery. I've never heard the word buttery. What do you mean by buttery?
Oh God, this is a big world of so there are 3 types of acid in grapes. So there's tartaric acid, and you see it in wine and the outside of your cheeks and the tongue. You've got citric acid, which the name sort of, I guess, speaks for itself. Your lemons and your limes, it's right at the tip of your tongue. And you've got malic acid, which is front and side. Malic acid is a bit like apples, and that's apples and pears type of acid. It's the acid that everyone wants. You want malic acid in there. When you're talking about freshness in wine, that's normally what you're talking about. So when a wine when a grape is ripening and you're picking to flavor, so you either pick, if a wine is in a warm climate and it's a cool climate variety and it's ripening too fast, there are 2 outcomes. You either have, when I say it's ripening too fast, it's sugar ripeness. So sugar ripeness is very much influenced by climate. Flavor ripeness is more influenced by varietal. It doesn't change as much. So warmer climate, faster ripening means, that your flavor sometimes isn't there. So you hang on to get the flavor there, by which time the alcohol is really high, or you harvest with less flavor to keep the alcohol low. And with that process, the creation of the increase of sugar, you're degrading acid, and the acid you're losing is the malic acid. So in a warm climate Chardonnay, for instance, you've lost that malic acid, and you're only left with, so when you go to harvest, you're only left with citric acid and tartaric acid. And there's a process called malolactic fermentation. Just think of it as acid fermentation. So there's all those different fermentations in wine, but acid fermentation uses different yeasts, lactobacillus. It's effectively, it happens in all red wines and some white wines. And what it does is effectively, it converts the acid, normally malic acid, but if there's no malic acid there, it goes to the citric acid, and it converts that to lactic acid. And lactic acid is a creamy type of acid. And unfortunately, warm climate where there's no malic acid, that process happens to citric acid. That process creates a buttery texture to it. So I don't know if it was the 1980s Chardonnays in Australia in particular were very buttery because our warm climate was a citric fermentation rather than a malic fermentation. And whereas malic fermentation, completely different story. That process creates these creamy Chardonnays. So it's more fulsome, more richer on the palate rather than buttery. It wasn't really butter, like a burnt butter, maybe. I don't know what that, but you saw them more back in the 80s. They've died away now. Most people either harvest them young, underripe, and deal with that in the winery by using more aggressive yeast to get more out of the wine, to get more alcohol out of the wine and try and unlock more flavor by using some additives, perhaps. I won't say what they are, but they do that. And that helps. So that sort of died a little bit, but yeah, it's not a style anyone really aspires to in the winery much anymore. There's still a large segment of the population who likes them. Like I got French mates who call them Australian wine Vegemite. Like they don't understand how Australians like them, but they get it that it's created a demand that isn't evident anywhere in the rest of the world. So that's probably it. That's the only time you really hear buttery in terms of normally it surrounds white wines that are cool climate varieties in warm climate, and that process creates a buttery outcome. So it's
Would you say that Paul's Rock was a buttery wine?
oh god, it's Paul's Rock. They're Hunter Valley, aren't they?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
It was what
So they've toned it back. But they used to be very buttery. Things have changed. Like, yeah, in the 80s and 90s, like Australia doesn't have a very long history of premium wine production. Like, the first families of wine, most of them were fortified sherry producers. Like that was Australian wine till the 70s. Like it was really the 90s where we kicked it off properly and started really chasing the world. And that was the Len Evans, with Rothbury and the Hunter and Halliday and his mates at Brokenwood. And they were, the Napsteins and Adelaide Hills and the like. So there wasn't, like, we didn't even understand oak usage in Australia probably till about 15 years ago. And that was the other side, is used to have they were buttery Chardonnays. There were also oak bombs. You'd have this buttery oaky. That was why the ABC all came about, was these buttery oaky. And it was because we were using red wine barrels with our Chardonnay, and red wine barrels and white wine barrels are chalk and cheese. So a white wine barrel, you want a really fine grained barrel. And at a microscopic level, it will look like carpet. So what you do is you're harvesting the oak on the slowest growing side of the mountain. So it's denser. So the grains are closer together, one way of saying it. And so that doesn't, it's like when you drop wine on the carpet, it doesn't integrate, the wine bubbles up, doesn't integrate heavily into the wine. Whereas red wine casks, you want red wine, like you want the other side, you want the faster growing side, you want coarse grain, you want it to look at a microscopic level like corrugated iron, because you want the wine to integrate. You want the oak influence. So when you used to buy 50 barrels for your winery and 30 for your Shiraz and 20 for your Chardonnay, you're getting that red wine oak influence. And we're also toasting them really heavily. There was a big, so it's interesting, the French didn't even used to toast barrels. I was stunned. I didn't know this. What I'm saying, we're in Australia, well, the French, it's just cultural stuff they've always done. They've just never bothered teaching it, explaining it to anyone. And it's just hidden away by an artist in the back room, and it's a dark art. And then finally someone finds out and explains it. We're like, oh, that's what's been going on. And toasting was one I didn't even realize. So until recently, is the French never toasted. So toasting, you obviously heat the oak staves so you can bend them to create a barrel. The Americans in the 70s, Mondavi, started toasting them. It's like, well, what happens if you burn them a little bit? Because we dealt with it last year with smoke taint in Australian wine. So the release of volatile phenol, so perfumes from burnt eucalypt aren't so great. They fall out varying distances, and some are, don't do much, some do a lot, and you end up with these wines that are completely ruined by smoky bacon, ashtray, acetone characteristics. But if you burn oak, it releases a sweet vanilla style. So that's what they worked out in the 70s with Mondavi, is if you burnt this oak, you release this vanilla. So all of a sudden, your red wines got this vanilla aspect to them. And then we started going, oh, isn't that cool? It's like every new idea, everyone then does it, but then they do it too much. And all of a sudden, your white wine barrels are being toasted and everything. And so now we're dialing that back, because it's like the French are like, what do you mean you're toasting your white wine barrels? Like we use a flame, but it's just to warp the wood, nothing more. And so, that's where these are sort of the lessons we're learning, I guess, as we go along.
Evolving.
Yeah, trust me. This game I don't recognize it. Sorry.
Can I ask about the color?
Sorry?
So I was absolutely fascinated to see
Yes, Mimi.
the
Yep.
similarities. So the Marie Louise is so dark,
Correct.
almost
Correct.
orange.
That's the Pinot Noir. So just 24% Pinot Noir.
How does it get such a dark color?
That's so we okay. So
Okay.
that's
right.
so when you take the grapes in from the vineyard, depending how long they've been sitting there, so you harvested them.
Yes,
It's
yes.
half an hour, 5 hours. They start interacting anyway. There is some maceration, as it's called, but effectively it's the influence of the skin on the color.
Mm.
And then when you then take them in, so you want to press them. You probably don't want to crush them if you want no color, because as soon as you're crushing them, you're pushing the skin and the juice in together. You're effectively squeezing it all together. Whereas pressing them, you're trying to press the juice out, and you press it out really quickly. So the aim there is you don't leave the fruit on its skins or with its skins for any period of time. And that creates a clear juice. Now, you can't completely remove the color. That's right. Go with me.
Sorry, I've got so many questions. The acidity, I was absolutely blown away by the beautiful balance in the Blanc de Blanc, the Blanche
Fleur.
Blanche Fleur. Is such a beautiful balance. Is that the malolactic fermentation that produces that balance to the acidity?
It's interesting. Oh God, it's yeah. So yes and no. So say we're going back to our table Chardonnay. So like our La Comtesse has no malo, and our Jeanette has full malo. So that will take about 1 gram a liter of acid out by doing that process. So absolutely. So normally they go on at about 7, they end at about 6 or maybe 8 and become 7 is probably more likely. So yeah, you reduce the acid by about say 10%. So that is correct. So you'll see that floating out, but it won't be the explanation between it and the other sparklings because they've all done that together. Fruit, to be honest, like there's a reason why the most expensive champagnes are Chardonnay only, is because it tends to it's regarded as the better quality champagnes because Chardonnay is just is the right variety in most of the champagne or the wine world's estimate for champagne. It's why our Marie Louise is still 76% Chardonnay. So the only reason you see Pinot Noir around is because remember that until 150 years ago, most of champagne was just red wine. It wasn't even champagne sparkling, and so they've just made use of what was planted and turned it into sparkling. And like your Moet and Chandons and the like are pretty much 100% Pinot Noir. So that's your cheapest end of the champagne market. So that might be it. In terms of compared to the others, like there's the acid level between the Chardonnay, the Blanc de Blanc, and the Annabelle is, I think it's 10% difference. So it's actually quite a lot more acidic, the Annabelle, than the Blanc de Blanc, which is amazing because most people think Blanc de Blancs, you're designed to be really acidic. The fact that the Annabelle is more acidic is interesting. So that could be a little bit. You may be acid sensitive, which is fine. I'm pretty acid sensitive too. I really notice acid. I notice the different acids, which is always interesting because there's a lot of addition of acid in Australia and in warm climates where the acids dropped because of the over ripening. They add acid, and I don't like it. I can taste tartaric acid in particular. That could be it. But yeah, no, Chardonnays. Look, Cristal is pure Chardonnay. Like I can't explain it, to be honest, 100%, the difference. Happy to hear hypotheses.
Yeah,
I had a question as well.
I like the Marie Louise, but I found it more acidic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what the pH of it is. I actually, one second. I don't know if I. Is the his? Yeah, it's one of the. One second. I don't know if I've still got it here. I'm down in Sydney, so I can't dig into the ADAs. Leave it on my computer. I'll just have a quick look. If I did, Marie Louise, no, I didn't. I don't have it here. Wow. Okay. Oh, you'll be amazed.
And which is the Mary Louise your premium?
Correct. It's got more time on lees, so it's got an
sparkling?
extended time
Okay.
sitting on lees, so an extra 6 months over the others. And even though I keep saying Chardonnay, like it's that Paul Roger Winston Churchill, we're just looking. We're an on-premise winery, so our customers are restaurants, bars, and hotels, and so we're making wines for sommeliers, particularly, and for degustations. And this is designed to be a real tour de force for a restaurant to go with food. So the Blanc de Blanc is not really designed for food. So it's an aperitif style. So yeah, you have it when you arrive, you have it at New Year's Eve party, you're running around in the streets, spraying everyone, play Blanc de Blanc. But for us, yeah, we were looking for something really involved. We are making a pure Chardonnay extra reserve. But you won't see that for about 8 more years.
So what is your best Chardonnay?
The Jeanette.
Was it?
The Jeanette. It's named after my mum. My mum's so Victoria, you're saying before you love Chardonnay. My mum loves Chardonnay.
I love Chardonnay, but I've gone off it recently. That's why I'm trying the reds, and I don't know why. And I had a guy that keeps telling me, I don't even know where he's from, but he sent me this French Chardonnay, which I liked. And then, of course, he then couldn't get it. And he sent me some shitty other Chardonnay. And all the stuff that I've been drinking, I don't know, I don't know whether I've lost a palate for it. I don't know. But I'm not liking what I've been drinking. So
The problem with Chardonnay is like Pinot Noir. Sorry, Schnock, I'll ask you, there is the problem with Chardonnay and Pinot is they're really site specific. It's the reason why Burgundy is like micro terroir, to the point where, because they change, like you move 100 meters in Burgundy and you get a different Chardonnay, it's not an easy variety where you go, I like Chardonnay. Like I don't like a lot of Chardonnays, to be honest, but I like some. I love some. And then there are others I hate.
Out of all my friends, they kept saying to me, you are the only Chardonnay drinker for the last 15 years. So then I tried to evolve, and now it's coming back.
It's a sign of sophistication, Victoria. It's the queen of whites is Chardonnay. So, the French, everyone agrees the most expensive whites in the world are Chardonnay. So,
Well, it makes sense, so it must be good.
Well, you don't, when you're the style leader, you don't have to follow trends. So, Ishan, you're going to say so. Exactly.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, how often would you use the Merlots in champagnes?
Oh, interesting. So the first one, the 2019, we used some Merlot. I don't know. I don't know if it's really worth it, to be honest. There now, the Cabernet, the 2020 is mainly Cabernet, like 90% Cabernet. I'd actually be more likely to use more Petit Verdot. The 2019, we just didn't know it was the first attempt. So we're pretty happy with the first attempt. 2020, we're like, no, that's almost pure Cabernet. Petit Verdot, because it's also it's got quite strong fruit tones, and you can also get some good acid from it. Merlot, I don't know, it's a bit of body and flavor, but I don't really want that in my sparkling, like too much body and flavor. Like maybe 5%. It's not going to be a dominant sparkling style for me. Or for us.
Sorry, one other question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Which one would you have with like your Christmas dinner? Like if you're having a turkey Christmas dinner?
A turkey Christmas dinner. Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, look, if you're having a white meat, I'd have a rich Chardonnay. I'd probably go a rich Chardonnay if it's like a turkey. That would be lovely. Like white meat's beautiful. Like you've got to have, if you're not, you're probably going into a Pinot.
But which of this, and would you have a sparkling?
Oh, which of the sparkling? Oh, white meat. I'd probably go God. I wouldn't normally say the Marie Louise, but I'd probably also say the Annabelle now. I think that it's
choice.
I think those two would be the pick. Yeah, Marie Louise still with definitely with salmon, like really fatty fish. Like Pinot Noir is great with salmon. The best salmon match I've ever had was 3 Hat Restaurant. Alejandro was in Queensland, and he made. I had a meeting with the owner. Who's now one of my good mates, and he was saying, he brought out a wasabi butter, it was pistachio crusted salmon steak, and it was phenomenal with Pinot. Probably one of the best matches I've ever had. And I was like, oh wow, I'd never really thought about it from this perspective. But yeah, definitely white meat, like chicken, turkey. Oh yeah, that would be Chardonnay or Annabelle.
Will, do you do any sparkling reds? I know
You do Rieslings.
Riesling. Oh, there's quite okay. Reds first. No, I want to make a sparkling Shiraz.
I've been to
put it in a back burner for a while.
I've been to Peterson's house and they do like a Chambousson and they do other red sparklings, and it always is a difficult thing to get my head around.
You got to chill them down, massively chill them down.
Yeah, it's
Like
an
straight out of the freezer sort of stuff.
unusual drink, isn't it? I really enjoy them when I drink them, but at first they're really surprising.
Yeah, there's quality. We won Best Wine in Australia a couple of years ago. We were down in Adelaide, and the winning sparkling was a red, sparkling red. It was interesting. It depends on everything. Look, there you go. You got a mutual friend. You can share notes. I think that's a Peterson's. It looks like their label.
This one's been lying for a while. That's pretty special.
That's going to be good.
Rockford.
The Black Shiraz. Oh no, Rockford. Oh no, that's really cool. Oh, that's great. No, they're like, it's amazing. On a hot day in summer, you want like in a hot day in summer, like sometimes the reds, like you should be chilling your reds a bit more anyway. Australia, we serve them way too hot. Like mid-teens is good temperature for most reds. But like that, you could do like 11 degrees and, barbecue outside, steak there or whatever you want to have. And that would be fantastic. That's it's a bit the same with some of the bigger rosés as well. Like, Australia, like the French, we're driven by a lot of what they do because that's their cultural outcomes, but the climate's different here. We eat differently here. And so we can do things a bit differently. Like that would be a key one I'd be having with a steak or something like that. A bit of fun. Yeah, I'd love to. We're just a bit too cold. I'm worried that we can make that Cabernet, Cremant, but I don't know if we could make a full-bodied sparkling. We've got beautiful Shiraz. I'm arguing with my dad, but I'm like we're adding like a wine a year, and it's that tow truck analogy, like the Pinot Gris this year, and Mimi, we're planning some Riesling. So we'll see it in 5 years. So purely because there's a block that vineyard that's very frost prone, and interestingly enough, Riesling's not very frost prone. It's bud bursts very late, so outside frost season, and it's right next to our botrytis blocks that we use for our sweet wine. And you don't want a red grape there because red grapes and botrytis are a disaster. You spend a lot of money, and so you're constantly trying to. You want the botrytis, then 3 meters away you don't want the botrytis, and it's just this constant battle. And our vineyard operations manager is doing his head in. So we're like, we'll change it to Riesling, because that way, the reason why it doesn't matter is because the botrytis, develops a bit later in the season, so you've already harvested the Riesling by then. Or what could happen is you can make a botrytis Riesling, and now we've got three sweet wines. The problem continues, more wine. Ishan, mate, you've been waiting a while. Sorry, dude. You're asking a question?
Yeah, no, sorry. I was going to ask: is Blanc de Noir and Rosé Champagne the same thing, or are they two separate?
Sorry, is Blanc de... Yes, no, yes, probably yes. The short answer. But it depends on skin maceration time. So the amount of duration. So Blanc de Noir, most times they're trying not to have any color, like that really light pink blush. But if a rosé, so it's like you're thinking like the Charles Heidsieck, where they have the sparkling rosé champagne, and they've actually, it's more, they've just spent a bit more time on skin. So they're trying to get more of a rosé, and they're probably indicating it. It seems a bit overkill to say Blanc de Noir and rosé. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's both.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
That's right, mate. So any more questions? You've asked a lot of questions, which is great. It means you're engaged. I love that. I've done dinners and events where no one says anything. You're like, so did you enjoy it?
How long is the drive to Ralston, Will?
It's 3 hours. 3 hours, but probably 3 hours from the CBD. It's getting closer every year. They put another tunnel in. So the Anzac Bridge to West Connects will get us probably just below 3 hours. And then if they get the tunnel from Katoomba, which they're talking about now, Blackheath, Katoomba to Mount Victoria, will probably get us down to 2. Oh, it probably won't make it a lot faster, but it will mean that you won't have slow trips. So that drive from Hartley up to Mount Victoria, you get stuck behind a semi or a breakdown, this trip goes from 3 hours to 5 very quickly. Because it's a single lane, the tow trucks can't get to them. It's a nightmare. So that's it's a beautiful area of the world. Like, I don't know if you've been out our way. I call it country light. We've got baristas, we've got yoga, we've got art galleries. It's people in Sydney think wine, they obviously naturally gravitate. Hunter Valley, there may be Southern Highlands because a lot of people are in the Southern Highlands. Hunter Valley just because it grips, New South Wales conscious, because obviously a lot of our old wineries, big wineries are there. But if you come west of the ranges, this is the wealthy, traditionally wealthy farming countryside. Like, these were towns that were built 150, 160 years ago when there was a lot of money in the country areas. So the towns are super pretty. That Mudgee, Orange, Bathurst, all the towns, Ralston, we've all got stone pubs, stone main building, stone streetscapes. It's evident. And now with tourism rushing back, there's been a real renewal process in the streetscape, and you've got hatted restaurants and the like. So we're hoping to build. We've got a DA in to build a hotel and a restaurant on our site next year with 30 rooms, and I've got a mate who's a multi-hat chef who wants to run the restaurant. So there's definitely a rising demand out our way, but it's different. It's a different type of area. It's a bit further away, which actually is quite good, because I find sometimes the Hunter, you get stuck behind, a Bucks bus or a Hens bus, and I feel for them. I got mates who got great wineries there, and you're in there chatting, and next thing you know, 30 footy players to send out of a truck. But you're like, I just want to have it. Actually, you know what? I'm probably more likely to join them, but I'm probably lying. But on a wine night, I'm not.
Heaven forbid you get stuck at the Lovedale long lunch up in Hunter Valley. That's chaos.
It's like Bob Hope, Hope Estate. I don't even. He's like, I'm not really a winemaker anymore. I'm an events person. That's my business. That's the wine side of his business would be a rounding error compared to the other side of his business. So
the only thing that came out of COVID is that people are travelling more around Australia and seeing all these areas. How far are you out of Sydney?
So 3 hours. So not a far drive. It's so you can chopper. It's 40, 50 minutes by chopper. It's interesting. Most of the drive is winding roads. So we have a windsock up. We do have people fly in by chopper. I don't know, like people. What's fascinating and what's been obvious in the last year is how wealthy Australians are. Like, we don't. So we're as I said, we're Tourism France's wine partner for Australia. So I do a lot of the dinners for the ambassador, and especially now that not a lot of the dinners, but I've done a lot of events with them, I guess, especially because no French winemakers can get into Australia. I've sort of cornered the market. And the comment, I was speaking to the head of Tourism France, like, that Australians are like your AAA grade tourists. You've got money and you've got time, but we don't normally spend it in Australia. Our friends are in Hotel Cap Ferrat at, Eden Rock, or they're in the Hamptons, or they're in Mykonos, or, they're off overseas, and now they're here, and you're realizing we're stupidly wealthy. And you're seeing that with restaurants and bars selling wines that they never thought they'd sell everywhere. It's the issue for us, and the biggest issue we confront in the regional area is a lot of our hospitality inventory is old. People are paying, Sofitel prices for country comfort quality. And that's going to change in the next couple of years, like with what we're doing, but quite a few other people are now investing. So we're hopeful that you've got a taste for it. Now let's give you a proper experience so you come back. So choppers will be one. Friends of ours are redoing Katoomba Airport. They've had all sorts of problems. What they've gone through. They had the airport. The airport's been going for 80 years, and they had some people who We've obviously moved in next to the airport in the last 20 years when it was effectively mothballed for a period of time. And then they've been fighting a campaign saying we don't want an airport in the Blue Mountains. Like, well, it's been here for a long period of time. And it's their main airport used by the RFS. It's the emergency landing strip if you're crossing over the Blue Mountains. These guys are spending money on it, but they'll win inevitably because they're not planning on making it a big airport. They just want to be able to do some business from it. And one of the things we want them to do with us is that we want them to do a transfer service from Katoomba to us, because then it's an hour and a half. You can stay at Lillian-Fells or, you know, you stay at the Fairmont, and you then the chopper ride from there is 25 minutes from Katoomba to us. And it's over Walgan Valley, Kapiti Valley, and it's just magnificent. I don't know what it would cost, but these are all of the different sort of offerings that we're looking to develop out in the country areas. I think there's
About $400 a head.
sorry,
About $400 a head.
$400 a head. Yeah, yeah. So, which, you know, based on, I speak to people all the time who say, look, this year I would have spent, you know, $100,000 going to Europe with the family, and now I've been able to clock up 10 grand in Australia. Like, there's just nothing around that I can really drop money on relatively. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing in terms of, you know, where we can go.
In some respects.
Well, I saw the data. Australians, I can't remember what it was, but it was something like foreign tourists spent $20 billion a year in Australia, and Australians spent $30 billion overseas. So there's a $10 billion net saving having Australians locked in our own country. So it's a big thing. So, but who knows? So, guys, if you want to
Will,
buy,
thank you. A wonderful night. I think I'm going to have to log off now.
Me too.
Pleasure,
But
Mimi.
thank you so much.
No problem.
Had a really good time.
I was just going to quickly say, if you want to buy any wine, I know my sister sends out around an email. It's 20% off any wine. It's up to you. Come and see us. Otherwise, I know she'll send the details afterwards. Have a look online. Come and see us. Or come to one of the wine dinners. I'm doing Riley Street Garage and Thai-Im Restaurant next Friday and Saturday night, and then I'm doing Thai-Im Restaurant, Think Ottolenghi. Sorry.
How does that work?
So they send. So the chef designs a meal that gets sent out on Thursday or Friday with reheat instructions, and we run a virtual wine dinner for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Chef talking, videos, how to prep. So everyone sort of cooks along.
Send that to us? Do you send that to us?
Yeah, I can 100%. If you sign up in our newsletter, I've got your email. I forward. If you sign up in our newsletter, you'll see the details. But we have 170 people on these dinners. It's incredible. We have like CEOs of organized. There's been a couple of big CEOs on there. Media gets. So I'm doing 2 next weekend.
But also, Will, can
Crazy.
you send your best, the Merlot and the Chardonnay that you think that I like? And I'm happy to pay for it. Don't want it free.
Yeah.
Then order.
Oh, thanks, Victoria. Thank you.
Need some advice.
Oh, you're lovely.
That sounds great. I might check it out.
We're doing
Thank you,
Hearts Yard in early September as well. So just keep an newsletter. We don't put them up on Facebook. They're selling out in 2 to 3 days. So, but next weekend is on. So Thai-Im, actually I'll put them up here. So you can say Thai-Im Restaurant. Go and look them up, or Riley Street Garage.
Riley Street Garage.
Next week. That's next weekend. Friday night Thai-Im, Saturday night Riley Street Garage, which you know on Darlinghurst Road. So there, and then we'll be doing Hearts Yard. We've got another Thai-Im. But our online, put your email into our webpage. We send it out and they're selling out. So
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
That
Thank
was
you,
very
guys.
informative. Bye.
Thank you for putting up with me all that time.
No, it was very
Thank you.
interesting, very
Yeah.
informative. Thank you.
Thanks,
guys are
Will.
lovely.
Enjoy.
And
See
happy
ya.
birthday for tomorrow, Vanessa.
Oh, thank you.
Happy
Yeah.
40th.
Perfect.
Happy birthday.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys. Take care.
you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Yashan. I'll chat to you soon, dude. We'll catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure seeing you, mate. So hope you hope that was all right. How'd you compare that to last week?
I'm
I'm stirring my dad up. I'm going to stop recording now. I'm joking.
Yeah.